Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I wish to make a statement about the House practices regarding accusing members of lying or deliberately misleading the House. I recognise there are frustrations around the House's practices. Firstly, let me say that there are means by which accusations of lying may be brought before the House, including by means of a substantive motion. The Scottish National Party did so on their opposition day in November. However, members may not accuse each other of lying or deliberately misleading the House unless such a substantive motion is under consideration. Erskine May is clear that it is to preserve the character of parliamentary debate, which I take to mean to stop it descending into fruitless cycles of accusation and counter-accusation. May I also say that expressions, when used in respect of the members, which are regarded with particular seriousness, generally leading to prompt intervention from the Chair and often a requirement on a member to withdraw the words, include charges uttering deliberate falsehoods. It is important to stress context. Similar words said in different proceedings might attract a different response from the Chair, depending on the subject being debated, tone and other considerations, but in general the Chair will not tolerate accusations of lying or deliberately misleading the House. That is the long-standing practice of the House, as set out in Erskine May and followed by successive speakers and deputy speakers. Of course, long-standing practices may change. For example, if the House decided it wanted a different approach, perhaps informed by the Procedure Committee inquiry, but it's not for me to change the practice unilaterally. Therefore, I ask members to respect this approach. I know feelings run high on important issues we discuss, but there are plenty of ways of making strong feelings felt within the rules and without placing the Chair in the invidious position of having to order members to withdraw on seeking their suspension. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'd like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I now call Esther McVeigh.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this Sunday, Her Majesty the Queen will become the first British monarch to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee. While it is a moment for national celebration, it will be a day of mixed emotions for Her Majesty, as, of course, the day also marks 70 years since the death of her beloved father, George VI. I know that the whole House will want to join me in thanking Her Majesty for her tireless service. We look forward to celebrating her historic reign with a series of national events in June. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. McVeigh.
On Monday, the Secretary of State for Health said mandatory vaccinations would be subject to a consultation. So can the Prime Minister make it clear, unequivocally, no ifs, no buts, no qualifications, that mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff will be abandoned? Will he also make it clear that is true for care workers as well, many of whom have already lost their jobs? So what support will the government be giving to get those care workers back into the care sector, and will those who've lost their jobs get compensation?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend very much for her thoughtful work on this. I want to stress that vaccines remain our best line of defence, and I do think that NHS staff and all those who work in the care sector have a professional responsibility to get vaccinated, Mr. Speaker. But as my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, told the House on Monday, given the difference between Omicron and Delta, it is right, and she is right, that we revisit the balance of risks and opportunities, Mr. Speaker. The Health Secretary has said we'll launch a consultation, and subject to the responses and the will of this House, Mr. Speaker, the government will revoke the regulations.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And following your opening remarks, I just want to say to the members opposite, theirs is the party of Winston Churchill. Our party stood together as we defeated fascism in Europe. Now their leader stands in the House of Commons parroting the conspiracy theories of violent fascists to try and score cheap political points. He knows exactly what he is doing. It's time to restore some dignity. Mr Speaker, one of the most absurd claims made on behalf of Operation Save Big Dog is the Prime Minister and the Chancellor writing in the Sunday Times that they are the tax-cutting Conservatives. Why do these alleged tax cutters keep raising taxes on working people?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on his first point, I don't want to make heavy weather of this, but I am informed that in 2013 the Right Honourable Gentleman apologised and took full responsibility for what had happened on his watch, and I think, Mr Speaker, that was the right thing to do. And Mr Speaker, on what we're doing to tackle cost of living and taxation, Mr Speaker, our COVID recovery plan is absolutely vital in helping people with the cost of living, lifting up universal credit payments, Mr Speaker, by cutting the tax that people effectively pay, lifting the living wage, Mr Speaker, helping councils with another £500 million for those who are facing particular hardship, Mr Speaker. But what we're also doing, and this is absolutely vital, is increasing the number of high-wage, high-skill jobs in this country. 420,000 more on the payroll than there were before the pandemic began, because we've had the fastest exit from COVID of any European economy, Mr Speaker, because we had the fastest vaccine and booster rollout.
Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, it's not just the national insurance rise. Thresholds for income tax frozen, a stealth tax on working people. The threshold for tuition fees frozen, a stealth tax on working people. Local authorities forced to increase council tax, a stealth tax on working people. You can be as stealthy as you like, but you can't hide reality. We have the highest tax burden for 70 years during the middle of an inflation crisis. So I ask the Prime Minister again, why do he and the Chancellor keep raising taxes on working people?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what we are doing is helping people with the cost of living, cutting taxes for those on universal credit, Mr Speaker, as I have said, helping people with the cost of their fuel, Mr Speaker, with the cold weather payments, the warm homes payments, Mr Speaker, doing all the things that this country would expect, lifting the living wage, which this party, Mr Speaker, introduced. This government has increased by the record amount, Mr Speaker, and above all, the most important thing that we are doing is helping people into work. 500,000 people off welfare into work under our Way to Work scheme. More people in work now than before the pandemic began, and that is the record of this government. Labour, never forget, Mr Speaker, there's never been a Labour government that left office with unemployment lower than when they left. Check that out, Mr Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Lots of words, lots of bluster, no answers. Word of warning. Word of warning, Prime Minister. That's not going to work with the police. I'll tell him why they're putting taxes up. Low growth. In the decade of Tory government before the pandemic, growth slumped. It was much, much weaker than under the last Labour government. If the Tories matched our record on growth, we would have £30 billion more to spend on public services without having to raise a single tax. Mr Speaker, surely even this Prime Minister doesn't need someone else to tell him that he and the Chancellor are having to raise taxes because the Tories failed to grow the economy over a decade.
No, Mr. Speaker, I think everybody in this country can see that we've been through the biggest pandemic since for 100 years, that we've looked after the people of this country to the tune of £400 billion, that we've put into furlough and all the other schemes, 11.7 million people protected. Everybody knows the cost of that, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, in spite of all the difficulties that we have faced, we have now got the fastest growth in the G7. Absolutely true. We've got youth unemployment. We've got youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker. We've got 3 times as much tech investment coming into this country as there is in France, twice as much as there is in Germany. Yes, that's absolutely true, Mr. Speaker. And never forget, if you want to know about Labour economics, never forget the last time they were in office, Mr. Speaker, when they were finally booted out, they left a note saying there's no money left. That's the way they run the country, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the UK...
Some people won't be getting more because they won't be here to hear it, so Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has suffered the worst economic crisis in the G7. The Prime Minister has more chance of persuading the public that he didn't hold any parties than he has of persuading them that the economy is booming. High taxes are not just the result of low growth. Under this government, we've seen a pandemic of waste and fraud. From the Prime Minister's yacht to government contracts for mates of ministers, they've treated taxpayers as an ATM machine for their mates and their lifestyles. Now we find, Mr. Speaker, they've written off £8.7 billion on PPA, and the Chancellor's writing off £4.3 billion in fraud. That's enough to cover the tax hike he's inflicting on working people. So why did this government block the National Crime Agency from investigating all the billions they lost to fraud?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course we despise fraud and those who steal from the taxpayer, and that's why we've already recovered £743 million in lost furlough money, Mr. Speaker, £2.2 billion that was stolen in bounce-back loans, and we will go on. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I am proud of what this government and this country did in securing record quantities of PPE and record time, Mr. Speaker, in furloughing and looking after the entirety of British business and society in the way that we did, Mr. Speaker. And once again, Captain Hindsight comes to this House and attacks the government for doing exactly what he urged us to do 18 months ago. Mr. Speaker, it so happens that I found a letter. I've been rustling in my notes, Mr. Speaker. And I found a letter which I will place for your convenience in the House, in the Library of the House, Mr. Speaker, from the Shadow Chancellor to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Deluxe, suggesting that we could secure PPE supplies. This is on April the 22nd, 2020. Secure PPE supplies from from a theatrical costumier, and that we could get ventilators from a professional football agent, Mr. Speaker. No wonder under Labour, fraud was running at £21 billion per year, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of what this government did to secure PPE, and I'm proud of the way we protected this country.
Keir Starmer. Who wants to be the first to leave? Please put your hand up, because I'm going to pick one of you. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister might want to sharpen how he answers questions under interview. He's going to need it in the next few weeks. Waste and low growth explain why we have high taxes, but they don't explain why it's always working people that are asked to pay more. Yesterday, he ordered his troops not to support a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. As a result, the country is missing out on over £1 billion we could have used to cut taxes on energy bills for working people. Today, he's ordering his troops to vote for tax cuts for banks. As a result, the country is missing out on another £1 billion we could have spent cutting taxes for working people. Why are the Chancellor and the Prime Minister protecting oil companies and bank profits while putting taxes up on working people?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's just get to the heart of what this is all about. This is all about dealing dealing with the consequences of the biggest pandemic this country has seen, with an unprecedented economic crisis in which the state had to come forward and look after the people of this country to the tune of £408 billion. But everybody can see the fiscal impacts of that. Shall I tell you what this government and this country is voting for and what we're doing? We're investing now in 45,000 more NHS workers, more people in our NHS this year than there were last year. 10,000 more nurses, 10,900 more nurses, about 5,000 more doctors, Mr. Speaker, 9 million more scans, 100 community diagnostics hubs to help people to get the scans and treatment they need. And the incredible thing, the lamentable thing is that the party opposite, the party of Nye Bevan, Mr. Speaker, voted against those funds, voted against that investment, and they would have made our COVID recovery impossible.
What? Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, for all the bluster, the truth is the Conservative Party are the party of high taxes because they're the party of low growth. They are the party of high taxes because they're the party of eye-watering waste. Mr. Speaker, we know this Prime Minister has no respect for decency or honesty. I can take it when it's aimed at me, but I won't accept it when he gaslights the British public, writing absurd articles about cutting taxes at a time when he's squeezing working people to the pips. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that he and his Chancellor are the Tory Thelma and Louise, hand in hand, as they drive the country off the cliff and into the abyss of low growth and tax?
Mr. Gullis, I think you've been trilled for long enough and you don't want to be trilled anymore. And that is the last comment I have, or otherwise I will ring your mother. Keir Starmer.
Isn't it true, Mr. Speaker, that he and the Chancellor are the Tory Thelma and Louise, hand in hand as they drive the country off the cliff and into the abyss of low growth and high tax?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman is Dick Dastardly and Muttley. Both of them pulling in different directions. We know they have different views, Mr. Speaker. We are getting on with the job, Mr. Speaker. And just in the last few days, and of course, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that they've done nothing to support our COVID recovery plan. They've voted against our plans to support the NHS. But what we're doing, just in the last few days, while he's been fixated on the issues that he's absolutely determined to escalate, what we've done, we've opened free ports across the country just in the last few days. We're getting 500,000 people off welfare into work with our Way to Work plan. In just a few short minutes, Mr. Speaker, I hope he will hang around, because he will hear my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, deliver the long-awaited Levelling Up white paper, full of good stuff, including 55 education investment areas across our country. A wonderful moral and economic mission to level up and give opportunity across the whole country. A fantastic vision for this country, Mr. Speaker. They have nothing of the kind to offer the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, while we are getting on with coming out of COVID with the fastest economic recovery in the G7, the fastest. He would have kept us in lockdown, Mr. Speaker. We're fixing the NHS and social care when they voted against it, and they have no plan. And we are, well, Mr. Speaker, we are building a coalition. We are building a coalition.
Just a minute. Prime Minister, I'm this way, not that way. Maybe Specsavers might be the answer to see where I am. And can I just say, Dame Caroline Dinage is desperate to get the next question to you. Dame Diana Caroline Dinage.
Thank you very much.